So I'm Arthur Zajonc. I'm president of the Mind and Life Institute and was for over 30 years a professor of physics at Amherst College with a specialization in quantum optics. For those 40 years now, I've been living in a certain way and practicing at the intersection between science and the contemplative practices and domains of life. I'd say the first moment when I had at least that, you could say, the image of what I wanted to do, the direction that I wanted to live my life in, was when I was 21, and I was not at all clear what I wanted to do. In fact, I was about to leave school. It was during the Vietnam War period. So leaving school was tantamount to signing up for the Army and going to Vietnam. And I was pretty desperate, and groped around and searched for a faculty member who ended up becoming a very important mentor in my life. He was a physicist himself, an old Dutch man who had worked for a Nobel laureate, Uhlenbeck. Came over to the United States as a young man after the war. And by the time I met him, he had found his way into a very deep relationship with contemplative practice and physics. In some ways, he embodied the two dimensions which have become the central axis of my life. But how to bring these two together, he hadn't succeeded really fully. That was my estimation. You know, I loved him, but I also recognized he hadn't really fully accomplished that. So the question of how does one bring the two dimensions of life, the practice of science in its purest and most exciting and challenging forms, in my case it became study of quantum optics and the foundations, experimental foundations of quantum mechanics, and the contemplative life, which I took up then about 40 years ago, now over 40 years ago, and have been trying to practice more or less religiously ever since. You know, if we probe a little bit more deeply into that moment of awakening, you could say, to what became my calling, it was an existential crisis. I mean, I think people have these things, right? It's the moment where you're looking at your life and you're saying, this is not worth it. This is just not worth it, right? I'd been a great student, and as a high school student, the first couple of years of college, did fine, but it was increasingly meaningless. Why? You know, people are dying in Vietnam, the civil rights movement is underway. Here I am, a kind of studious type, you know, intellectually okay. Why? And I couldn't answer that question. It was a very powerful point of my life. So when I encountered someone who was living, you might say, impossible contradictory elements, the inner life of contemplation and the outer life of science, something clicked. I thought, you know, I don't understand this. I had never meditated. I had no consciousness of, I grew up as a Catholic boy in a Polish, you know, Catholic family. I mean, this was like novel. This was not the kind of spirituality I was accustomed to. But it was the kind of thing I must have been inwardly seeking. Something which spoke to my commitment to science, which is based on experience and thought, reason. And what the kind of practice he was holding out had both of those. It wasn't abandoning thought. It was enhancing the domain of experience, enlarging the domain of exploration, and bringing all of your intellectual capacities into that, maybe in a new way, maybe more alive than I was accustomed to. And then I would go back and read my science books with a totally different view towards what science could be. You know, it wasn't constrained and straitjacketed in the way it had been before. He exemplified, he had been meditating for himself for about 40 years at that point. And you meet people like that and you recognize that reality. I very quickly recognized this is not an ordinary professor of physics. He was very demanding. If you did not prepare, he'd send you out the door. So it wasn't like, oh, Arthur, you know, everything's going to be okay. None of that. It was discipline. study, practice, bring it together with the science. How can science become a contemplative act? The doing of science. As I said, I don't think he fully resolved those issues, those questions, and so they became my questions. How is it I take quantum mechanics and I combine it with Goethe's approach to science and I combine it with the contemplative? How is I live the contradiction of wave and particle? How is I try to understand the sort of called ontological holism of quantum entanglement, right? These are abstractions for most people, but that's my thought world. And those have profound implications for our understanding of the world around us, that it is knit together. If you say, most people will say, oh, the world is interdependent. Isn't it that cool? But they don't know what the hell they're talking about, frankly. Or it's all organic. They don't know what that means. But you can write down a mathematical equation now and do an experiment, and I've done such experiments, even with undergraduates, which demonstrate the impossibility of taking things apart into pieces and have those pieces be explanatory of the whole that comes together once you've entangled them, interacted those two particles together. The wholes and the parts aren't the way we thought they were. The whole truly is more than the sum of the parts and can't be decomposed into parts. You can even measure the degree of entangledness, how much wholeness there is. You can create a quantum computer, in fact MIT is in the business of doing so, which runs off of that ambiguity, the ambiguity that only arises through quantum entanglement. A new kind of machine, never seen before, is being invented for that. Now to think that thought not as an abstraction, but as a way in which this world is organized, truly organized, takes the notion of interdependence to a whole new level ontologically, not just a metaphor or a kind of systems theory approach to everything connected. That's one level of you might say, accomplishment. But to my mind, quantum optics and quantum mechanics has demonstrated a profound level at which the world is knit together in ways that now we, for the first time, not only can imagine, but we can actually implement. Now, how do we do that in a context which is ethical? Because you see, the mathematics can make an atomic bomb, or it can make peace. That comes from us. How as we cultivate an inner life which can take these powerful themes and ideas that are throughout the campus here at MIT and Harvard, right? Not just in the physics, but in the molecular biology labs, the Broad Institute, all around here, right? Every conceivable ethical issue is being raised at the hand of the new technologies, and they have to be addressed competently and adequately with the deepest resources we have. And frankly, science is not competent. But I think the contemplative conjunction, science and the contemplative, begin to verge on that competency. There are ways in which the inner life can be cultivated so that the ethical, compassionate, moral life, which is available to every human being, it's not the property of any church or creed, available to every human being, can be enhanced, and the moral perceptions, if you will, can be had and can be shared, debated, and in a certain way agreed upon. To me, that's what our times are calling for. If you look at what the technologies of today are producing, the science of today makes possible, we've got to have a competency that is as high and as clear and as insightful as is our scientific competency. Failing that, we're going to create monsters, right? Not because we want to, but because we just don't have the insight necessary on the other side of the equation, the insight necessary on the ethical side of the equation, on the interior and contemplative side of the equation. But by juxtaposing and connecting these two, feels to me and has become increasingly apparent to me that provides our best hope. Not based on fundamentalisms or credos or what have you, but based on the continuation and expansion of the scientific spirit, but now into the inner life of the human being, which is available simply by going in there in a disciplined way, the same kind of clarity that we do in the sciences. And so Mind and Life, among other attempts, has been a way and a venue for that intersection. And I'd say it has been one of the most powerful and fruitful venues that I've encountered. where not just I, but a whole community of scientists, and not just my age, but many, many young scientists who are anxious to bring the inner and the outer worlds together. Their practice of the intellectual and demanding mathematical study of the physical and psychological universe, neuroscientists and the like, really bringing their practice traditions, their engagement with the inner life directly into contact with their deepest and most earnest scientific studies. And now, for the first time, really, I'd say the final chapter in my aspiration was how can this be of service? You know, it's never been good enough for me just to sort of do the theory. I want to make it impactful. I want it to have some kind of real meaning and impact in the world. And being an educator for 30 years at Amherst College, teaching, which has been a great love of mine, as well as doing the research, how is it I can make that alive in education? How can I make that alive in practical matters generally, but specifically for me in education? So our call to care, as we're calling it, is our key educational initiative for pre-K through grade 12. We also have a graduate level course in leadership, and we're looking for something as well in the undergraduate years. But that is exciting for me to see the juxtaposition and intersection of the contemplative and the scientific bearing fruit in this world of education. MIT, your edX course, should open doors for everyone to engage at that level of care and sophistication with these what seem to be opposite domains of life, the interior and the exterior, for lack of better terms. So I think the work that's taking place through the Presidency Institute, through Mind and Life Institute, and comparable institutions is trying to make that systematically available. So every summer we have 150 young scientists and contemplatives coming together with a distinguished faculty of world-class scientists and contemplative scholars on a theme of our choice: craving, desire, and addiction, destructive emotions, bringing the best minds together with the best young people who are graduate students, postdocs, and they spend a week together. We're always oversubscribed because there's so many who want to engage at that level. Okay, now what would I say? I'd say join the community. Know that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of young people around the planet who are just like you. And now at MIT, at Amherst College, distinguished institutions all around the world, Oxford University, Cambridge University, you name the university, there is no place that does not have an Otto Scharmer, Peter Senge, Arthur Zajonc. They're all there. You may have to dig a little bit to find them, but increasingly they're becoming part of a global community. And they all have distinguished themselves in the conventional way, and they all are practitioners and cultivators, in the language of Peter, who also have appreciated the kinds of issues, ethical issues, contemplative issues and practices that I have. So they're not alone. They may not want to be a physicist. They may want to be more in urban studies or poetry or whatever discipline. They're all available. You don't have to study the mystical literature in order to be a contemplative. You can do exactly what you want. You can be an elementary school teacher. You can be a quantum physicist. They're all permeable. They're all able to be illuminated by the light that is kindled through introspection. For the first time in my life, for the very first time in my life, all the pieces are together. Amherst College was a wonderful home to me. By the same token, I was kind of alone. There were just 2 or 3 other professors doing this kind of work. Now, at the Mind and Life Institute, there are thousands that I work with, tens of thousands. We have 20,000 people we're in regular communication with. They're all academics, contemplatives. They're all doing this work. There are probably hundreds of thousands we haven't yet found. We've got an office in Zurich. We're going to be having an office in Asia. We have 20 people in Western Massachusetts. There is so much good work that can be done out of this impulse To me, it's like the ripe fruit, the kairos, the time is ripe, and I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to be at that nexus in this moment. It's a privilege and an honor, and one I hardly dare to even think about in some ways. You know, just do the work. You know, get to rest in a couple of years.